I can see things are shifting, and I think that's why there's a lot of chaos that's going on because the female energy is beginning to flip things over. And instead of thinking so logically, we're beginning to have those emotions. We're beginning to, we can organize things like the logical side, but it's more of, guys, we need to look at spiritual. We need to find our truth. We need to think outside the box. Not everybody thinks the same. So I think that's why it's really important for us to look at that and to see, yes, Jesus back then fought for women's rights, but he's not known for that. God is so much love. The galactic beings, everybody is helping each other. Again, we're all one and there's no separation. There is always a plan. And I was able to see how this plan works and how my energy has raised so much higher that it was so uncomfortable at first until my body adjusted to it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast, where we explore the unseen, the unknown, and the transformative moments that shift our understanding of reality. I'm your host, Jumi Moses, spiritual seeker and metaphysical investigator exploring the mysteries of existence. On the show today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Michelle Henderson. Michelle is an author, psychic shaman, and healer who blends her deep educational expertise with profound spiritual insights. She channeled the voice of Sarah, a woman who walked alongside Jesus and brought her timeless teachings on truth, wisdom, and love to life in her book, Sarah's Spiritual Journey with Jesus. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today on Shifting Dimensions.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so excited because I like to do some deep diving myself. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
this is the show for that. We
Yes.
definitely take deep dives. So I want to start off with you, right? Before we get into your book, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
insights there. I want to ask you how this book came to you. There's so much to talk about there, but I think it's important for the listeners and for me as well to really understand your background. So you were a teacher for 30 years. And
Yes.
now
Yes.
you are a psychic, you're a shaman, you're a healer, you do more metaphysical things. Can you
Right.
walk me through that journey? How did you get from being a teacher to doing more spiritual work?
Yes, and that is a great question. And I did grow up in a Christian home where we went to Sunday school every Sunday and went to church every Sunday, and very conservative town. And I was very close to Jesus. I mean, anytime I got into trouble, I'd go in my bedroom and I would talk to Jesus about it. And he was like my counselor, my friend, all the above. And I just felt very close to him. I also had an intuitiveness, and I did not understand. I would start trying to talk to my friends about it, and they would kind of like back off and they go, I don't know what you're talking about. Because at first I thought, everybody has to have this, right? And so I didn't shut it down, but I tuned it down so that I didn't feel much of anything. And as a teenager, I still used, I always tell people, well, my gut feeling is telling me. And that's how I would make my decisions. And in my 20s, it's whenever it got really strong. It was like Spirit was talking to me saying, okay, can you use us? Let's do something about it. But I was not ready. I was still in that fearful energy of anything happening to me because that's what I grew up with. That's what my friends were telling me. And so, again, I told everybody, the spirits, I was not ready yet. And I even went to my minister and she told me, she said, Michelle, if you are not ready to hear from them, she didn't tell me it was evil. She just said, you can tell them not right now. And so I did, but I still used my intuition whenever I worked with the children. I knew exactly what I needed to do to help each one. I knew what to do to help each parent. And so I still used my intuition, but I was still in the closet psychic medium. Now, I would not read anybody because, not without their permission, but sometimes I could kind of feel and hear what they were thinking. And I had to like cut it off. I'm not listening. I'm not listening. And my mediumship came one evening when I was watching a movie. And I had a grandmother of a friend that kept popping in, and she would like not really scream, but really in a loud voice in my head saying, I want you to tell my granddaughter something. I have a message for her. And so I really felt like I said, okay, as long as you let me watch the movie, I will do this. And so that's when I knew that I needed to understand it better. And so I found another psychic medium in the area that really helped me tune in my gifts. And she said, Michelle, you're not going crazy. This is not evil. This is a part of you. And so whenever that happened, it just, oh my goodness, it just grew from there. But right before COVID, I was very burned out in education. And I told my husband, I've got to do something else. I've got to do something spiritual. I feel like I'm being called. And that's where my huge spiritual journey actually started.
Wow, what a powerful story. And I think a lot of people can resonate with your story, right? Growing up in a very religious household or community. And a lot of times when these gifts start to come in, oftentimes we're told that it's evil. So we shy away from it. So it sounded like you may have thought you were scared of your gifts and
Yes.
that maybe there's a part of you that thought maybe this is not of God. Um, but what's interesting about your story is that you weren't really able to fully shut it down because I've talked to people who
Yeah.
have these gifts when they're younger, but they are able to really cut it off. And you were never really fully able to cut it off. I mean,
No.
granted, they weren't disturbing you, but it seemed like obviously this is the work that you were supposed to do and your gifts are probably very strong, so that's probably part of the reason why you couldn't cut it off. So speaking of kind of being part of a conservative community, how did your husband take it when you told him that I need to do something spiritual? I'm kind of tired of I'm being burnt out being in education.
Well, it's so interesting that you asked that because he knew I was a little woo-woo. He knew because I would read every book. I would watch all the programs, podcasts like yours, to try to dive into it and try to understand it. And I would talk to him about it. So he knew. And he actually had a mother and two aunts who were very spiritual. And it's so interesting because he grew up, his dad was a Baptist minister. And later on in life, he quit and got more spiritual himself. And so my husband grew up with it. And when I asked him, I said, do you think I can go into it? He goes, I can't tell you not to. This is if your heart is telling you to go. And he has supported me 100% since then. He may not understand it, because he is so logical, but he accepts it through me. And so, I'm sure that if he got a little bit curious or got uncomfortable with it, he would tell me, but he has not yet. And yeah, so
That's beautiful. You said the most important thing is that he supports you, and that's important
yes,
because not everybody gets that support
I
because it
know.
feels like such a
Yes,
big shift, and people feel uncomfortable with it. So I'm glad that you have that support from your husband. So you describe yourself as a psychic shaman. So we touched on one of your gifts, which is mediumship, which is being able to connect with people who
yes,
crossed over to the other side. But what I found interesting is about your title is the shaman connected to the psychic
yes,
part of that. And
yes.
I just wanted to know, what does that mean to be a psychic shaman?
Okay, so to me it follows that it's non-traditional shaman because when you think of a shaman, you think of the very ancient shamans that it's run down from family to family to family. And for me, of course, I don't have any shaman in my family. And I actually started, let's see, my spiritual healing also integrated plant medicine. And I was being called from plant medicine. And so I did a couple of journeys that really broke the tie of in between, still my fear of all of this. It finally opened my heart to it, and I found it spiritually. And so now I understand the energy behind it. So looking at it of course, I don't use plant medicine to do energy work. So whenever I'm healing, what a shaman does is you're a bridge between this world and the next world. And so with a psychic in there, whenever you do a psychic healing, you're connecting with somebody's soul, a soul to soul connection. So I get their soul, their energy to connect in to the bridge. Instead of me doing it, I help them do it. Because whenever I was doing a lot of psychic and mediumship, I'm thinking they're coming to answers outside themselves. They're coming to me for answers. but they can find it themselves. And so that's why I thought, psychic shamanism together explains exactly what I want to do with this
Mm.
work.
That's very interesting. So when you say that instead of you connecting, trying to do the healing for them, right? Like the shaman piece, you said it's they're the bridge between this world and essentially the spirit world.
Right.
You work with people to get them to that in-between state so that they can do the healing.
Yes.
So, are they in a meditative state when that's happening? How, because usually when I've talked to other healers, there's this idea of, again, they're kind of doing the work for you, sensing what's going on in your body, doing the clearings. So it sounds like once you get people to that in-between state, they're able to
Right.
clear themselves.
Yes. And so, yeah, so they are in a meditation state because they've got to get all the sensory out and they have to tune in themselves. And so that way I can grab their energy and focus up into the bridge, into my energy to shoot them up. It's almost like what plant medicine does, but I use the energy instead.
Okay, and while they're in that meditative state, are you giving them cues as to, okay, now you're in the in-between space, focus on what you want to heal, whether it's something emotional or physical, and focus on that healing? I'm really curious to
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
mechanism.
Not during the process, before we set an intention, before we even
Mm,
get started.
okay.
So they set an intention and everything. And they don't have to share with me because whatever intention that they have, it will come across to them what they are needing at that time. And sometimes it's very difficult because their logical mind does get in the way. And so we do like a little ceremony before to try to get them past that so that they are not afraid. Because there's so many people that are afraid of it and they start feeling their energy vibrate and they get higher and higher and then they'll come down. So it may take a couple of times before I can actually get them to get into the bridge.
Okay. And you said that most of the time you don't know what their intention is or
Right.
what they're trying to
And
heal.
because I don't need, yeah, no, I don't need to know. They themselves need to know what their intention is. And my role in it is to get their energy up so that they can self-healing and get the messages that they need from the spiritual world.
That's very empowering. And do you have clients who've come back to you and say, this was my intention, Michelle. I set the intention to release anger, to heal from anger. I'm spitballing here. And do they come back to you and say, oh, that session was very powerful. I feel a lot lighter. I've released that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, yes, but they also say I still get triggered once in a while. And triggering is okay because you're still learning to let that go, until it integrates further. And so we talk about things that they can do to get past that
Okay,
in real life because it's almost like integration is how am I going to integrate what I learned in that spiritual session into my life?
fantastic.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting and again, very empowering. Okay, another one of your gifts, which I think ties into your book about Sarah, is channeling. So before we talk about that process, I really want to understand how channeling works for you.
Okay. Well, and I learned channeling through mediumship, getting my energy so that I could connect in with somebody who has crossed over. And so you're raising your energy. Now, there are different kind of channelings. How I did the book is through automatic writing, through trans channeling. And so I allowed the spirit to come in and take over my left hand. It had to be my left hand for some reason. And so she came in and I could visualize everything that she was writing, everything she was talking about, and I could also feel it. And so I'm present and I know what's going on. It's more of a conscious trans channeling.
Okay, where she
Yes.
takes over your body.
But
Where,
but I'm still conscious of it.
right.
Some people are totally out of it and they don't know what's going on. I know what's going on during that time.
Okay, you kind
Yeah.
of like take a back seat while she kind of works through you.
Right.
I'm curious, are you naturally left-handed?
No.
Oh my gosh. So
Yes.
when you were,
So
yeah.
Yeah, so I just allowed her to pick up the pen and she chose the left side. And so I wrote it, she wrote it that way. But I do want to kind of back up a little bit because before I had her come in, I was doing a very deep meditation. And I had Jesus come in, and it was a different kind of visitation, I guess you could say, because I could see his robe and I could see his feet and I could visualize his whole body. And he came in, he said, I have somebody here called Sarah that I want you to tell her story. If you are willing to do that, we would love it. And so they were asking me permission. And I said, oh, absolutely. And so anytime I would meditate, I would bring her in and we would kind of talk about how this was going to look like. And so whenever I decided to go ahead and channel her, I knew to get the pen and just let her pick it up and then start from there
Thank you for
and get
sharing that.
into the trance state. So
Yeah.
I already knew what was going to happen before I started.
Okay, thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
because I actually was going to ask you how you connected with Sarah for the first time. And for those who are
Right.
listening, just a reminder of what the book is called because I mentioned it in the intro. It's called Sarah's Spiritual Journey with Jesus, a channeled story of divine love and transformation. So, again, for those who are listening. But yes, thank you for sharing how you first connected with Sarah. So, I think another thing that you mentioned is the fact that you channel wearing a headpiece. Is
Oh,
is
yes.
is that accurate? Yeah.
Yes.
So again, I
Yes.
keep harping on the mechanics of your channeling because I'm
Yes.
interested in that. And
Oh,
after that, we're
right.
gonna get into the book. But what's the significance of using a headpiece during a
Um,
trance channel?
because it was very sacred of what was going on during that time, and it was mainly me. And she said, well, if you want it to be sacred, wear the headpiece. And then I also lit a candle. So I was almost in the dark, had the lamp on, and had the candle lit. And of course, I would always set an intention and a prayer before I got started. But and I wouldn't even let my husband come into my office until it was done. And I said, you cannot go in there. We cannot change the energy until I get completely done. And so it was more of a routine. A Before you do any type of shaman, you always do some type of ceremony. So I was doing like a ceremony because I felt like it was very sacred.
Right, which and it also kind of, I guess in a way, psychologically informed you that you're choosing to enter a state of trance channeling.
Exactly.
Okay. And it sounds again like you intentionally created time to channel. And the reason why I'm saying that is
Mm.
because I think I channel. I don't consider myself a trans channel, but I can feel, well, I don't even know if it's channeling per se, but I can feel when a stream of consciousness or ideas are just like flowing through me.
Oh,
And a lot
yes.
of
Yes.
times it just happens sporadically. I'm not even trying to get that download or stream of consciousness. It just takes a hold of me sometimes when I'm walking. Again, it's
Yeah.
not like you where like a being is in my body
Oh, no,
necessarily,
no, no.
but it's just like again, it just feels like a rush, a download of all these ideas. So I was gonna ask you, is that how it happens for you? But it sounds like you actually create space, create time
Right.
for it. It's not something that
Right.
just happens while you're walking in the grocery store. So that's good to know.
But
Um,
that's channeling. Yeah, what you were doing was channeling. Artists channel all the time.
mm,
They get, when they're writing a piece of music, a lot of times they'll get, oh, I know exactly what that needs to sound like. So that's channeling. Yes.
yes, yeah.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite psychic abilities. I feel like it could be
Yes.
stronger. I haven't strengthened it that much, but I love when that comes through me. So, okay, now to Jesus and Sarah. So, what I thought was interesting is I, this Sarah that you're talking about, and from, looking into your book, I've never heard of a historical account of her walking besides Jesus. But technically, there is a historical account of her, and that will be
Yeah.
unearthed as we talk in this conversation.
Right.
So, going back to when you first channeled Jesus and Sarah, how do you know it wasn't your imagination? Because,
Oh, yeah, I know.
yeah.
Okay. And I'll tell you that because, yes, and you start logically thinking, Am I bringing whoever needs to? Am I creating a story? So whenever I started channeling Sarah, and I didn't even know who she was at the time, as we're going through her story, and I was feeling and I was visualizing everything, some of the things that were in the book, I had to stop at one time, and I really had to think, am I really wanting to do this? And I'm thinking, this is not my story, this is Sarah's story. But I'm going, but I didn't grow up believing this way. And this is something I've never heard of. I wasn't raised Catholic, and I'm going, I don't think the Catholics believe in this. And I don't know if I want to actually get a book out there that has this in there. So I really had to do a lot of self reflecting. And you go through, well, am I making this up? But because I felt so called to do it and it was so strong in my meditation, I knew it wasn't my imagination. And so I finally had to tell myself, you know what? This is not me. This is Sarah's story. And the reason why she came across as Sarah is because and we'll get more into it, as you said, but she didn't want anyone worshiping her. She said, I want the story to get out and they can find out for themselves who I truly was.
Why was it important for her to get her story out through you?
And that's a great, and I've had a lot of people ask me, why did she choose you?
Mm,
And I will tell you, I am not the only one that she's channeling through. And it's so interesting because I'm seeing more and more people who are channeling a story from her. And we'll talk about who she is later. And I'm thinking I'm not the only one. And I think it's just so important for I'm not exactly know what's going on spiritually, but to me, I think it's getting a story out where I'm located. And there are other people that are getting other stories, and they may not match up with the same story, but her main purpose was to talk about Christ consciousness and to get a message out. And even if a Christian does not believe the story, you can always think, you know what, this doesn't replace the Bible, but it kind of extends it. And I can say, well, what if this happened?
mm.
So it really, and I think the female energy is so needed in today's world that I think that's why more and more women are channeling ever before. Or I don't know if they have before, but they're finally coming out and saying, I'm channeling. Because I think before it was very difficult to get out as a channeler.
Yes, and I love that you said that the female perspective is really needed
Mm.
more than ever because a lot of what we know to be the authors of the Bible and just religion in general, especially Christianity, has been so male centered and dominant. And I think when we think about Jesus Christ, we think about the 12 disciples and they were all men. But
Yes.
we know that Jesus also walked with women and he most likely
Yes.
had female disciples as well. So I
Right.
think people keep saying that we are in an age where feminine energy and what it brings to the table is becoming more and more important as we elevate in our consciousness because we've been really immersed in such a patriarchal culture, but you cannot forget the woman, you know? So
Absolutely.
it kind of sounds like to me that um she's coming through to kind of give that feminine
Hmm.
perspective
Hmm.
of what it was like to walk with Jesus and Christ consciousness because I wrote down some of the themes that I picked up from your book, which had to do with gender equality, I would say, forgiveness
Yes.
and love as a path to empowerment, rebirth, body, mind, spirit connection, and then also parallel timelines and soul evolution. And I kind of want to briefly touch on, some of those themes. But, in the book, there was a part where Sarah was traumatized, right?
Yes.
She was assaulted. And I think that was a
Yes.
very pivotal part of the story. So if you could talk about that and what do you think, what was being communicated by that story?
Okay, and I love that you asked this. Yeah, so at the very beginning of the book, whenever after she meets Jesus, he invites her to the campfires during his ministry, and he said, "I want you to be able to help me minister to women." Okay, so this I'm jumping ahead. Okay, so she goes to, yeah, so she goes to campfire. She knows he's ministering, and she brings her friend. And so they're at the campfire, and that's when Jesus said, "Is there anybody that wants to get up and speak?" And of course, Sarah said, "I'll speak." And so she gets up and speaks. And when she's walking home after her friend leaves her, yes, so there's an intruder that comes into her house and does a lot of physical acts to her. And of course, she almost dies through this whole thing. And the next morning, her friend finds her and then goes and gets Jesus. But I think, and then he helps heal her. But I think what it mainly centered on is to forgiveness. She not only had to forgive her intruder, but also she had to forgive herself. And I think that's a huge story because it would be very difficult to forgive somebody who came into your home and invaded you. And of course, back then, when you get invaded physically, you are not clean anymore, and she knew it, and she told Jesus, no one's going to want me now, no one's going to, if you don't want me, I understand. And he said, no, you're going to teach so many women that you are, it doesn't matter, you're still clean, you haven't done anything wrong. And so he was teaching her how to forgive.
The other thing that this story brought up for me outside of forgiveness, which I want to dive deeper into, um, even though this was obviously a traumatic part of Sarah's story in what you channeled, her being physically assaulted in that way,
Yeah.
and, Jesus teaching her about forgiveness, but something else it reminded me of is the policing of women's bodies throughout history. There's like desire, but also shame for what we bring to the table, right? And
Right.
using that framework as a means to make women feel unclean or not as liberated to explore themselves in different ways, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yes.
So that was also kind of like a theme. I was again, it was
I love it.
a violent or traumatic experience Sarah was having, but I also it
Hmm.
just kind of reminded me of this, especially when Jesus says you will never not be clean, like your spirit is still clean. This
Right.
has nothing to do with who you are as a being. Um, I just thought that was very powerful, especially for women. So I just
Yes.
wanted to highlight
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
love it.
awesome.
I love
Um,
to hear other people's perspectives on it. So that's
yes,
great.
yes. And
Yes.
that's a fantastic thing about writing because you could be writing something one way and feel like this is how people are going to
Right.
interpret it, and then someone else might have a different interpretation or an inspired thought about something else. Okay, so I want to talk more about Jesus and Sarah's relationship because obviously she walked with him, she learned from him, and it seems like Jesus assigned her this role of um speaking to other women and kind of being the leader of women. So can we talk about that a little bit as well as her relationship with Jesus?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, of course, they were very close because they traveled from camp to camp. And she was almost, later on we'll find out, but she was almost like the feminine side of him, where he was the male side of energy, she was the female side of energy. But they were very close. He never told her what to say, she learned from him. And then I think Jesus also wanted her to be there because she could relate, or the women could relate to her, and she could be like the, not the mother of the women, but kind of the mother energy that they were needing to know how important they actually were. And she kept asking him about his background, where he came from, and they had a real respect for one another.
People who are listening to this right now, they might think to themselves, Sarah, I
Yeah.
thought he did all of this with Mary Magdalene.
Yes.
So who is Sarah in comparison to Mary Magdalene? Are they the same person? Were they with Jesus at the same time, but Mary Magdalene just got more of the, what's the word when people know you? Popularity,
Oh,
you
right.
know?
Right. Okay, so they were the same person.
Mm,
So do you want me to go ahead and dive into the story?
yes, please.
So one of the evenings, whenever they were at a camp, she laid down in the tent and Jesus came over and he goes, I want you to follow me. Would you follow me? And she goes, oh, okay, of course. And so she gets up and they go into a valley that's surrounded by mountains. And she's seeing these light beings and she's going, okay, what is going on? And she trusts Jesus, so she's not fearful. She's more curious. And so she's talking to this light being, and this light being is talking to her. And they would call these light beings star people. So they were not angels, but they were from galactic beings, I guess you could say, that were helping Jesus. Now there were angels as well, but not during this time. But anyway, Jesus said, "We love you because you are so your spirit and you've got a huge heart. We want you to really work more with Jesus, with me, so that again, you can be my female counterpart, but we're going to change your name to Mary, like Jesus's mom, because very clean, very pure energy." And she's going, oh, okay, I can do that. She's thinks it's only her name. Well, the next morning, she's laying there and she's going, did I dream everything? I can't remember. How did I find myself back in bed? And Jesus came over after everybody was calling her Mary. And then they said, oh, you're Jesus's wife. And she's going, what? So she didn't even know. So it was almost like a Mandela effect. So the light beings reset the storyline for her. And so she's the same person, but her essence changed into this Mary Magdalene. And she's going, okay. And Jesus came over and asked again, is this okay? What? And she goes, oh, this is great. He goes, that you are my spiritual wife. And so that's why it was so pure and innocent. Not meaning they didn't kiss or anything, have a physical attraction to one another because they're human. But anyway, so they continued, and she still walked beside him, but she became the spiritual wife that he needed to finish his mission.
So many things there. And that
I
was the
know.
biggest revelation from the book because I
Oh,
was
me
like,
too. I was going, what?
yeah,
That's
as you were channeling.
I
Um,
never knew who she was, and I come to find out too after the written the book. Sarah, this is later on after Jesus's death. She actually has a daughter that's their child, and her daughter's name she said was Sarah. So she named her baby Sarah.
okay, so a couple of things here, right? You said that she was Jesus's spiritual wife.
Yes,
Um, Before I even get into that, you also talked about the fact that the beings, when she woke up, it kind of felt like, or probably was, she jumped into a new timeline where
right,
she
right.
was Mary Magdalene, she was Jesus's wife, and you use the Mandela effect there, and that's the premise of the Mandela effect being having timelines colliding
Yes.
with each other and people having different information. So I think that's fascinating. And I think that was like part of one of the themes in the book that we talked about parallel timelines, destiny,
Hmm.
soul evolution.
Right.
And I think, in the book, you kind of, Sarah slash Mary was talking about the fact that I think the beings had told her that there is a timeline where she never met Jesus, for example. And there's a timeline where she does meet Jesus, she's married to Jesus, and there's a timeline where her and Jesus probably just friends. And I thought that was like a very interesting download because obviously when we think of Jesus and Mary Magdalene in the Bible, those stories are not added at all about,
Right.
multi-dimensional existence. And I thought that that was interesting that that came through. So as you were channeling that, you having your Christian background, and I know earlier you were like, some of these
Yes.
things, I'm like, do I want to put this in here because that's not in the Bible? Was that one of those moments for you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's not that I didn't want to put it in there. I was about to stop writing it, period. And I didn't hear from Sarah. It was Jesus, or I didn't meditate on them or ask them questions. So I had to find out for myself if I wanted to continue during this pathway because they do give you a choice. And I felt, yeah, I felt very strong to continue. I thought, you know what, I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to finish writing this. I love that. I had several of her messages that were in back of the book. I actually channeled those first, and I really loved what she stood for. And I thought, okay, I'm going to continue with this. And again, it's not my story to tell or to judge. This is going to happen.
That's interesting. Was part of the hesitation also the fact that you didn't necessarily believe in the multiverse theory or the parallel timelines?
I no, I think it no, but at that point on my spiritual journey, I knew that was possible because
Mm,
of the quantum world and everything. I know that's very possible because I've been shown a lot through my healing journey. And so, and again, my logical mind is saying, did you really see that? Or was it the plant medicine talking? And I'm
mm,
thinking, and it kind of made me realize the prophets back during Jesus' day, they were getting information and they wrote everything down. And I'm going, now I understand how they feel completely because this information is ancient and it's coming from the spiritual world. And it's almost like faith. You can't prove faith, but you know that it's there. And so no, I believed in, but it's just, I know how people are so delicate in their belief system. And I just don't want, again, to offend anybody or, step over the line. And I'm thinking, okay, so that's where my logical mind was thinking. Since I grew up a Christian, am I going against the Bible? I don't want to say I'm not going against the Bible. This is just an addition to it or something for us to think about. So as I started thinking that way, I began to accept it more and more.
the reason I really wanted to really highlight that process for you because I think
Yes.
it's important, right? Because someone could say, okay, you're channeling, and how much of this is you filtering what you think Sarah slash Mary should say versus what she's actually giving to you. And that like visceral reaction to be like, I don't know if I want to put that in there, at least to me, kind of shows that that was an authentic channeling and not something because if you were writing it yourself, you probably would feel a little bit more
Oh, right.
cautious.
Right. Absolutely. And I was trying to, and the book was actually out about a year and a half ago or a year ago. And I did not really talk about it because I didn't know which way to go with it.
Mm,
And I was actually kind of guided to do podcast on it, to talk about it. And I'm thinking, I don't know, I didn't even know how to talk about it. And it's kind of like I'm being guided onto what to say.
yes. It can be scary having these conversations,
Yes.
especially if I mean, of course, you're doing this work now, but remnants of kind of being indoctrinated into a very conservative belief system, I'm sure still, when you get insights like this, can still serve as a trigger, especially when
Yes.
it's not just
Yeah.
an insight where you can keep it to yourself, but you're being guided to, write it down. So I'm glad that you continued with the book. So jumping back to Mary now being Jesus's spiritual wife, but then you also
Yes.
mentioned that they eventually had a kid, right? Because I was going to ask, like, what does it mean to be someone's spiritual
Yes.
wife?
Well, and it's because being a spiritual wife, she's helping him on his mission. Again, we needed that female energy in there. So even though earthly wife, yes, it's more important to be a spiritual wife so that he could finish his mission through her. So he
Mm,
was really needing her, yes. And I think it was really important for people to know that, she was there through thick and thin with him and really gave him the strength that he needed to continue. Because even though he knew what was going to happen to him, it was almost like he still needed that support because he's human. And she was there to help guide him. She was there when he died, whenever things were happening. She was right there beside him.
You know what's so fascinating about this, Michelle? I had someone on the podcast a couple weeks ago. I released their episode, I think 2 weeks ago. Her name is Rachel Corpus. She had a near-death experience that let her know that she's from the angelic realm. So she's here on a mission from the angelic realm. Long story short, it was revealed during our interview that she had a life as Mary Magdalene, and I was blown away. But I bring
Wow.
that up because a
Yeah.
lot of what you talk about in terms of her relationship, Sarah slash Mary's
Hmm.
relationship with Jesus, sounds very similar to what Rachel talked about in her relationship and time
Oh, right.
with Jesus.
Right.
The difference is that she says they had a son, I believe, not a
Oh, okay.
daughter, but
Right.
either way, they
Right.
had a
Right.
child together.
Yeah.
But again, I find all of this very interesting. So again, to recap, it's her being his spiritual wife doesn't mean she's not his physical wife as well, because obviously they had a child, they had
Right.
a real relationship, but spiritual in the sense that they both had the same spiritual mission. Did you get any insight from her as to why this part of their story isn't really talked about in the Bible? Like it's kind of alluded to slightly, but it's not really fully talked about.
And well, there's a reason for everything. And the collective chose for the Bible to be how it is. So humankind needed to go through this, this period of time to learn things, to be more spiritual, to find out, to have a spiritual awakening. And of course, we're seeing whenever you do your healing, you're doing generational healing as well. And yeah, so the collective knew that was going to happen, chose it to happen during this timeline, and for us to learn something.
you know, I want to talk about the themes in the book, right? Because I think they're very important. We've kind of touched
Okay.
on them, but I want to go deeper. I
Yeah.
kind of want to hear your thoughts on it, in addition
Okay.
to what you wrote in the book, but mainly your thoughts and how that can tie into our consciousness evolution as
Right.
humanity. But before we get into that, for those who are listening, should they be reading this as a true account, like a nonfiction book? Does it matter? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I absolutely love that because I think whenever I tell people is to just read it like it's a historical fiction. Don't think too much of it. See what her story is about, what her message is about. That's the important thing that they come across. So it does not matter how you read it. And it's very interesting because I did put the book, I worked at a holistic fair, put the book on the table because I just wanted to see who would come to the table because it's, everybody's there is into metaphysics. And here I bring, a book with this historical fiction there, it looks like, or Jesus on there. And I thought, I want to see who comes through. And of course, I still live in a conservative area. And people were drawn to this picture of her. And she's very young. And I don't think it was a title. I think it's her eyes, and I think it's the energy of the book that came through. So, and I told them as well, don't think of this too much because that logical mind and your programming, Christian programming, might come into play. So treat it as, what can I learn from it, and what are her messages from her story.
And I think that's fair. And,
Mhm.
again, when I was talking to Rachel Corpus, the woman who said that she had a life as Mary Magdalene, she
Right.
remembers that life. That wasn't planned. That just kind of came out as we were talking. So I don't believe in coincidences. So I feel like me having that conversation with her and having a conversation with you, I think what I'm picking up from it is that there's truth to her relationship with Jesus,
Mhm.
right? That's the thread there. And I think,
Mhm.
it's kind of Spirit is doubling down that information for me. So I'm not going to ignore it because I do, I didn't realize that because I have so many interviews stacked up that
Oh, right.
it just, I didn't even realize, I forgot that we would be having this conversation about Sarah's spiritual journey with Jesus slash Mary. And to be quite honest, I didn't look into the book until after talking to Rachel as well.
Right.
So, anyways,
Yeah, I understand.
yeah, so again, I think it's interesting that, the channelings and Mary's
Right.
coming through more and more in this
Oh,
time.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so jumping into the themes of the book, again, we kind of
Hmm.
touched on it, but I think it's important to kind of go through each of them. And I know there's a lot more here, but I just picked out the five that I thought was really important. So starting
Okay.
again with gender equality, right? Or, recognizing that women should be respected as much as men are. Why do you think that was very important for Jesus to harp on? And how does that tie into where we're going as a human race?
Oh, absolutely. So during Jesus' time, of course, women were treated as as objects, total objects. And he was an advocate for these women. That's why he said, I want them to be able to minister around my camp. And of course that angered a lot of people. And Mary had to be very strong to be able to do this. And because I mean, since she was violated for doing it, she continued to do it. And so, and I think we, believe it or not, I know that it's still difficult during this time, but I think we have come a long way in the United States. Now, there are other countries that they still have to fight for their rights and everything, but I feel like we've come such a long way, even though we still have a long way to go. And I think we are headed in the right direction. I can see things are shifting, and I think that's why there's a lot of chaos that's going on because the female energy is beginning to flip things over. And instead of thinking so logically, we're beginning to have those emotions. We're beginning to, we can organize things like the logical side, but it's more of, guys, we need to look at spiritual. We need to find our truth. We need to think outside the box. Not everybody thinks the same. So I think that's why it's really important for us to look at that and to see, yes, Jesus back then fought for women's rights, but he's not known for that.
And I love that you said that. And, looking at the current political climate, I rarely talk about politics on the show, but I know that from what I've perceived, because I don't watch the news that much for
Yeah, I don't
my, so that I
either.
can, for my mental health, to be quite
Yes,
honest.
I
Um,
understand.
but there's a lot of talk around living the virtues of Jesus Christ that I feel like
Hmm.
Jesus most likely would not do that, or
Oh, yeah. That's
Jesus would not speak to a woman like that, or, act in a very misogynistic way. And so I always just find it very fascinating that a lot of people in the political realm who are proud, devoted Christians and believe in Jesus Christ don't really walk the walk or talk
right.
the talk. And I think, again, with Sarah slash Mary coming through now more and more, I think it's just this reminder that this is what Jesus stood for. And not only that, but she was his wife, his partner
Yes,
in life.
yes,
And I
right.
think Jesus is kind of put in this category where, of course, Jesus is divine, right? And probably had psychic supernatural abilities that most people don't readily have, but Jesus was also a human being. So the idea that he didn't have a wife or a partner or children, I think is also again taking away so much of his life and his story, which
Hmm.
I think the Bible has the people who put the Bible together have intentionally omitted. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Now, moving on to forgiveness and love as a path towards
Mm-hmm.
empowerment. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
as a path towards empowerment. So, after Sarah's traumatic slash Mary's traumatic incident in the book, that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of where, like you said, Jesus talked about forgiveness and love. Why is that relevant today? Because there's so many things that happen that it's really difficult to forgive.
Oh,
And
oh, yes.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
forgive and to stay in the frequency of love. But that's something that always comes up when I talk to people about Jesus, right?
Yes, yes.
So yeah, I would love to get your insights on
Well, and
that.
that's what, yeah. So, and that's again what Jesus would teach. And of course, he taught a lot of the Christ consciousness. Okay, and I feel like this is a good time to kind of go through the alchemy of the elements of cross consciousness. So, the very first one, and it's very difficult even to start. It's like, the main question everybody always asks, why am I here? Why am I here on earth? So the first thing is to find your truth, not everybody else's truth, what society is looking at. What truth do you have? This is your foundation. This is where your tree and your roots really dig in. And when people start finding their truth, that kind of leads into it's almost like know thyself, right? Know thyself. And so then this comes into wisdom. So the second element is wisdom. Once you find out who you are, and you can actually start understanding the wisdom that the spiritual world will give you. Everybody may have different wisdom, and you've got to find your own wisdom at the same time and not think too logically about it. And you've got to apply this wisdom that you're learning to your everyday life. So then what comes is the third element, which is love, and that incorporates the forgiveness. To be able to be pure, to be able to be divine, you have to, and this has a lot of healing to go on. I know I have healed so much childhood trauma, and I could not move past my knowledge until I really healed myself so I could forgive. And once I learned how to forgive, then I started feeling the divine love. And again, you have to go back into childhood. And what I would do is I would separate my child essence from who I am now. And I would talk to that child and say, this was not your fault. You've got to forgive yourself because we put in a lot of baggage on ourselves. And you got to forgive the people that hurt you because that is your biggest lesson right there to find out who the divine is. And I have heard since then, and I'm really wrapping my head around it, is before you come to this earth, people, and I'm talking about now, I don't want to call them enemies. The people that have done wrongdoings to you are actually your best friend in heaven because they're teaching you how to forgive. They're teaching you how to heal these wounds. And they are there. And a lot of people don't learn it the first time, and you do a little loop and you go, by God, I'm living this again. Why am I learning? In other words, you haven't broken the chain yet. And you've got to really dive deep into your soul and to find out what you need to heal. To be able to do this healing, you got to have a spiritual practice. You've got to be in a room by yourself without TV or anything else. If this means praying or doing a devotion or meditating or doing yoga or sitting out in nature, you need to really know yourself so that you can do the healing.
That was great. And a couple of things, and I'm going to start off with where you ended things about the importance of love and forgiveness and how, you've gotten the insight that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are signed a contract with you before coming
Yes,
into this life, and you guys are very close up in heaven. I've heard that so many times on the show, and I
it's hard.
struggle with that. I
Yes,
really do struggle with it. I think
yes.
I do believe that love and forgiveness is extremely important, but my perspective on that is to maintain my frequency
Oh,
and
absolutely.
not be in a lower conscious state. Because
Yes,
when I don't forgive, when I don't release, that person, place, or thing still has power over me. And because we in many ways create our own reality, I don't want my reality to continue to reflect whatever harm, atrocities I've experienced. But, I struggle with you made a contract with someone on the other
yeah, I
side.
am.
I do think where I'm coming to an understanding, and it's obviously the more you know, the less you know, really. What comes up for me is like, I think that can be true in some instances, but because we are multi-dimensional beings and they're beings in different dimensions and levels with different agendas, and if we want to talk about star beings or if we believe that certain entities have specific agendas, right? Then
Mhm.
sometimes I feel like there are things that are put in place potentially to keep humanity's frequency low, right? It might not
Mhm.
necessarily be a situation of I made a contract with this person on the other side because we also still have free will, right? Like I could have made a
Absolutely.
contract
Yeah.
to maybe slap my friend, but then I come into Earth because I don't remember, I take it too far and decide to almost murder them, which is
Right. Right.
technically not part of the contract. Again, I know that there are layers to it, and I do believe that part of that is true, but I think I struggle with that being the case in all scenarios. But again, what works for me is like I don't even factor that in. I just more or less put in my idea of maintaining a high frequency and releasing whatever is holding me back in this life.
Right. Right.
And the other thing that you said about stage one of our own personal alchemy, which is finding our own truth. And then from finding
Mhm.
our own truth, we kind of get into our own personal wisdom, which I love because I think we're all here to have different perspectives, and that's what
Yes.
elevates our consciousness. But
Yes.
I think as human beings, we're like obsessed with having one unified truth. So what you're talking about here almost sounds like multiple truths.
hmm
Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Okay. Absolutely. So I think of it, the divine. Okay. So we're all one. So once we leave this earth, we go back into the consciousness. Okay. And then we either come back, it depends on where we are on the soul level. I won't go into too much depth. But when you come back to earth, you're like a fractal of the divine. So you still have that divine spark in you, and you're learning. I mean, the divine is constantly learning because the Akashic records, is growing. So we're having different stories, we're learning, we're having different experiences. That's for a reason because we all are from God as one, but we're all fractals as well. And that's why we're learning different things.
Yeah, I that makes a lot of sense to me, and that's how I've always seen the world.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I love having these conversations because I feel like it just gives more evidence as to
Oh yeah.
why we all have these different perspectives, and we all it all leads to the same truth, but the paths are different. That's kind of how I see it as
Right.
well.
And it depends on where you are and what you're needing to learn. And of course, we forget this.
Yes.
But I think of it as okay, so raindrops, come from the sky. And that's us. We're all separate. And then we make a pond and we all are one in the water. And
Mm,
the ripple effects, happen. And so I just love that visualization of thinking of how we are one, but we're separate.
that's a perfect visualization. I love it.
Okay.
So let's talk about rebirth.
Okay.
Does that tie into the whole finding your truth, listening to your own wisdom, and loving and forgiving, or is that kind of separate?
I think it's all the same. You are remembering who you are. We
Mm,
come to this earth, we forget, like what we're saying, we forget for a reason because and it's by age 7 where we completely forget because we're in society, we learn different things, we're programmed differently. But people are beginning to wake up and remember who they truly are and past lives are remembering. So I think it's more of a remembrance than anything else.
I agree. I think that's the age that we're in where people are, in many ways, remembrance, waking up to their own personal power. And
Yes.
I think, to your point, know thyself. And when you know thyself, it's
Yes.
almost a reinitiation, rebirth to who you actually are. Love that. The other thing you touched on in the book is mind, spirit connection and the role of free will in accepting healing. And I thought that was really good because
Yes.
some people say they want healing, but
Yes.
they're
It's
so
hard. Yeah.
they think they want it, but they don't want it. So I would love to just
Yeah.
touch on why it was important to kind of connect the mind, body, spirit, and then like free will in terms of healing.
Oh my gosh. Because whenever you heal, that's all the three things that you are healing. And it is, and people, you always see these. Instagram videos and say, "Oh, free healing is so easy." It is not. It is like the warrior. So you're healing all mind, body, and soul, and because your body carries all of the things that are hurting in past lives and even now it's in your DNA, it is in your cells. So to be able to heal where you are, you've got to heal every piece, every atom in you. And that is very, very difficult. And memories will start popping up that you may not have even known. Now, free will is so important, and it's almost like when you need help from angels, they will not come unless you ask them to. And so it's important to know your soul, if you are not ready to heal in this lifetime and you need to continue what you need to be learning, then it's in your free will to say, okay, I'm going to talk to God or my spirit team. This is where I'm going to be, and I'll continue in the next lifetime. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect
Okay.
sense.
Okay.
Because sometimes I'm not a licensed therapist,
Oh,
but
right.
I feel
Right.
like, in conversation with people, sometimes when they talk about healing, and sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's deep emotional wounding.
Oh, yeah.
And then just in conversation with them, I can tell they don't want to heal
Right.
because either their soul still needs to learn something, or a lot of times they've built an archetypal or fed into the archetype of, I don't want to say being a victim because I don't want to minimize how they feel, but
Right.
there is a sense of empowerment they feel from
Mm-hmm.
holding on to whatever is keeping them hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that might just still continue to be part of the lesson that they need to learn. But like
Absolutely.
yeah, it's easy to see almost spot when, people don't really fully want to heal because, to your point earlier is that with how you work with clients, we all have the power to heal ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And it starts with the mind, it starts with the conviction of actually wanting to be healed
Right. Right.
because that will speed up the process. Okay.
Yeah, and everybody's on their own journey. So
Yes.
if somebody is not in, and a lot of times whenever I did do the psychic readings or mediumship, they were not wanting to hear what I told them. And that's where I would get, "Oh, you don't know me at all." And it was like a defense mechanism coming out. And I knew I triggered them and I hit, I was going, I'm probably correct. It's just, so that's what I'm saying. A lot of times they have to heal themselves. I can't do it for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Final theme might not be the final theme, but the final one that I thought was important to, pull
Yes.
out parallel timelines and how that relates to soul evolution.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So I think a lot of people get hung up on is the linear time that we are living in. If you think about it, and this is kind of getting into the quantum, everything is happening at once. Everything has already happened, and you may not realizing it. Okay. And yeah, in evolution, it just seems like you're building up. A lot of people will look at the past and not really look at the future or go vice versa, and they get really confused. But with us writing things, and I think the spiritual world has a lot to do it because we don't know where we're going to go from now. Because when you look at the evolution, here we go with the free, when you're going, is that really something I can choose or is spirit choosing for me? I think it's both. I think it's the collective all at once. So that's where I think a lot of people get hung up. But you got to remember, it's already happened. You already know where you're going, and that is how things are, and you'll be shown when you're ready.
To kind of make sure I fully understand your point. I
Yes.
do, but just
Yeah.
I do this thing where I have to really make sure I
Yes,
get it.
please.
So it almost feels like with the parallel lives and like understanding the multiverse in many ways, we can choose the timeline that we actually
Hmm.
do evolve, or we can
Yes.
choose the timeline where we're not really evolving that much in a particular lifetime. We have all the different options because obviously we have free will, but we
Yes.
can at any moment decide to choose a more complementary timeline in terms of how we want to evolve.
Oh, well said. That's
Yay.
perfect.
Okay.
That is, yes, that is perfect. Yeah, because I think, and we are unaware of it when we do choose the timeline. You don't realize it.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
and I think it kind of goes into this thing that people talk about a lot online, shifting.
Yes.
And so I think there are two definitions for shifting where people are kind of imagining realms or realities where they're part of the Harry Potter universe. So kind of shifting and escaping from their current reality. And then
Right.
there's shifting where people are like, okay, I don't like this timeline I'm on. I'm
Hmm.
going to do something drastic so that I can actually get on the timeline that I prefer, whether that's a timeline with a better paying job, right? Or
Hmm.
a timeline where you're working for yourself, or a timeline that you're in a specific relationship. So I think what you're talking about a little bit as well touches on this whole like idea of being able to shift your reality
Right.
to a more desirable reality, which in turn could also help you on your soul evolution path,
Hmm.
wherever that is. Okay, well that's awesome. That this was a great conversation. Before we start to wrap up the show, I think it's important to kind of go back to where we started, right? Like
Okay.
you growing up in a very Christian household, Christian community, being afraid of your gifts, understanding the Bible and the teachings to be one thing, and then having kind of slightly different experiences. How do you see God now? Like the
Oh
God
my
in the
gosh.
Bible that you were taught
Yeah.
versus whatever you think God is now, are they the same? How have you evolved in that?
Oh, totally different. There are some things, and it's so interesting because whenever I started on the spiritual journey and I decided to become a psychic medium, I thought, oh, this is all there is. I mean, I wasn't really learning much more. I just knew about what I was able to do, to help people, but I felt like something was missing. And whenever my spiritual teacher said, we're going to start plant journeys, and I felt so compelled to go. I felt, and I don't know why. And because, I only drink wine. I never did anything else. I'm going, and I'm old. Why am I wanting to do this? So, yeah, so I went on this plant journey and the knowledge just came. Ancient knowledge came that I did not, what privilege to have before. And it's bigger than what we know. It's so much more magical than we know. And a lot of people, and I think a lot of people aren't where they are to understand. I mean, I've taken several plant journeys, and it's just I get shown more and more, and I go very deep. I mean, very deep. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm healed. Well, no, then I find something in my cells that need to be healed, and it comes out. And as soon as I heal it, I get shown more knowledge. So I don't want to go too much into all of the knowledge that I've been seeing, but again, it is so much more powerful. God is so much love. And when you feel that divine love in your cells and your bones, and it's almost like a second, like you do visit Earth a little bit with your big toe getting in there and saying, oh my gosh, the galactic beings, everybody is helping each other. Again, we're all one and there's no separation. There is always a plan. And I was able to see how this plan works and how my energy has raised so much higher that it was so uncomfortable at first until my body adjusted to it. Hope I answered your question, but
You
what you
did.
think of God, it is so much bigger. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like that ties up this conversation perfectly.
Yeah.
I always ask this question to all my guests because it's called Shifting Dimensions. We're constantly shifting. Have you
Yes.
shifted in perspective on anything recently? And it could be as deep or lighthearted as you'd like.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, maybe this will help us with this conversation. Okay, so this last a couple of weekends, I went on a plant journey because I'm in a program where it is psychic shamanistics, and I was actually shown that Mary's essence, not meaning I was Mary at one time, but her essence is integrating into my soul. And at first, that kind of scared me. I'm thinking, I don't know what that means, and I don't know what it is. I'm just learning along the way, which is sometimes it's good to be bliss, and then you learn it. But I'm feeling that she's going to help me a lot with the energy work that I do and any of the information that comes across so that I don't have to go into trance because she's right there. And so she's still integrating, and I never knew that was possible.
It's clear that you guys are on an assignment together, and it's almost like she's serving. It's deeper than a guide because you can
Yes.
feel her presence in your body, but clearly you guys are supposed to work together and bring more information about consciousness and Christ consciousness in general to the world. So that's amazing.
Yes,
Thank you
and I
for
was
sharing
able to
that.
see some of her memories too, which
Oh
was
my God.
awesome. Just the memories that I needed to see at this time. I know
Mhm.
there's maybe more that she'll show me, but she showed me her childhood and that she had a fabulous and happy childhood.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yes.
And it's interesting. I know I don't want to because we're supposed to be wrapping it up. I'll
Oh
just
no.
say this.
Yes.
I do think it's interesting that you said that because when I was talking to Rachel, I was like, how do you know you were Mary and not just like tapping into her memories? She had some physical imprints that Mary had
Oh,
when
right.
she was
Right.
alive. So that was like a big sign for her that like no, she
Yeah.
just wasn't seeing her memories. But again, I just feel like the essence of Mary, so many people are tapping into her
Yes.
energy, her life, because we need to know,
Yes.
obviously. So I think that's
Right.
really cool. Where can people find you, Michelle, if they want to learn more about you, work with you, or purchase your book?
Okay. They can go to my website, which is themichellehenderson.com, and they can email me there. And right now, I'm still working on my website. I'm not offering any services at this time until I want to make sure the services is what needs to be done for our time on earth right now.
Yeah, and that's real. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. I'm going to put that link in the show notes. It has been an honor speaking with you. You have such great
Thank you.
energy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.